One of the biggest differences between Northern Europe and Italy in the Renaissance period is the impact of the Protestant Reformation. In 1517, Martin Luther begins the Protestant Reformation in what is modern-day Germany, and Protestantism is much more widely and quickly adopted across Northern European countries than it is in the South, and particularly in Italy, which is the home of the Pope and the home of Catholicism. So in the early 16th century, art in Northern Europe tends to be, at least in terms of subject matter, similar to art in Italy. Pieces like the Isenheim altarpiece are quite common. So here we see a crucifixion scene that is similar to things we've seen in Italy. Northern European tastes tend to emphasize the suffering of Christ more than the elegance and grace of these scenes, like Italian paintings do. So this painting is a little bit more graphic and gruesome than versions we've seen in Italy, but in terms of content and subject matter, it's largely the same. However, even before the official beginning of the Protestant Reformation, we see that religious content in Northern Europe often starts to become more subtle. So if we look at a piece like this is a print by German artist Albrecht Dürer. The content here carries religious symbolism or religious allegory, but does not seem to be overtly religious. So the title of this print is Night, Death, and the Devil. And the most common interpretation is that of the stalwart Christian knight who refuses to leave his path with his faithful dog by his side in the face of fear of death, and death is the figure behind him holding up an hourglass with snakes and vermin coming out of his head, or the devil who's on the far right-hand side, this grotesque creature with a single horn coming out of the top of his head. So there's pretty obvious Christian allegory here, but this is not a biblical story, like we've seen in so many other paintings of the 16th century. And there's not an obvious biblical reference, just a more loosely founded reference to Christian behavior or to chivalric and knightly behavior. After the Protestant Reformation, religious art falls even further out of favor. Protestantism in general does not favor religious art, and one of the big changes the Protestants advocate for is a lack of money spent on art. They say that that money could be better used on charity and helping the poor, rather than making a needlessly ornate or needlessly decorative church building. And that means that artists are forced to look to other sources for their income. And the most common patron of the 16th century in Northern Europe is in fact not the church, but rather the nobility and the aristocracy. This piece, Holbein's The French Ambassadors, is a painting of the wealthy French ambassadors to the English court, and he was paid by these men to paint these pictures. If we look at this painting, again, there may be some very, very loose Christian symbolism or Christian iconography. This whole painting is actually filled with iconography, but most of the iconography here actually has to do with these two individuals and their personality and their tastes. The upper level of the table shows navigational instruments and objects that make us think of travel. And this is designed to show these two men as worldly, educated, and having a broad base of experience. On the bottom shelf, we see an open music book, and the stringed instrument behind that is a lute, which is an ancestor of our modern guitar. And lutes at this time were quite a popular instrument. Many people would know how to play them in the same way many people know how to play guitar today. But if we get a really good reproduction of this painting, one of the things that we might see is that the strings on the lute are actually broken. This is not in a playable condition. And this seems to be a reference to the religious conflict between France and England. France and these French ambassadors were Catholic, while England under Henry VIII had broken away and had formed the Church of England. The other place we see some possible religious reference is in this weird distorted section in the bottom center. This is what's called an anamorphic image, and this is an image that's at an extreme perspective that's different from the rest of the picture around it. And if you look at this from the left-hand side of the painting, so if you're looking at this on your computer, you can actually turn your computer and see it. You'll see that that kind of smeary-looking blob is actually a skull. And we don't really know why Holbein included this or what it was intended to mean. Most art historians think it's some kind of what we call a memento mori. And a memento mori is a Latin phrase which means remembrance of death. And these were quite common in the 16th and 17th century in art, and they're basically a reminder that we're all going to die. And again, like the lute or like the Christian soldier in Durer's print in the last slide, there seems to be some kind of loose Christian symbolism here, but this isn't specifically a biblical story, and it doesn't relate to stories from the Bible. So even as we're undergoing a profound religious shift, and society as a whole remains incredibly religious and influenced by Christianity, art becomes less Christian, and it embraces secular ideas and secular subject matters.